So good day. For today's video, we will be tackling the general provisions on obligations for week 2. After you watch this video, we will expect you to define what an obligation is in the context of civil law, differentiate the sources of obligation, and lastly, apply the general provisions of obligation in real life scenario. So for the first topic, I will be giving the floor to Miss Silvestre to tackle and dig more about what is an
Good day everyone. I am here today to discuss about obligation. Obligation. It is a tie of law or judicial bond by a virtue of which one is bound in favor of another to render something, and this may consist in giving a thing, doing a certain act, or not doing certain act. Ang obligasyon ay isang judicial tie o legal na connected na kung saan ang isang tao ay obliged to give, to do, or not to do something for another person. It is a legal relationship established between two parties. In this relationship, one party has the responsibility to fulfill the prestation that the other party can demand. Example, umutang ka sa tindahan ng 3 kilong bigas. May usapan kayo ng tindera na babayaran mo to makalipas ng 1 linggo. Ikaw bilang nangungutang, kailangan mong gampanan yung obligasyon mo, which is ang magbayad ng utang ng napag-usapan yung araw ng tindera. The next one is Article 1156. Gives the Civil Code definition of obligation. In its passive aspect, our law merely stresses the duty of the debtor or obligor when it speaks of obligation as a juridical necessity. Ang Article 1156 ay nagbibigay ng definition ng obligation sa Civil Code, specifically sa side ng mga debtor. Binibigyan din nito yung duty ng debtor or obligor na magbigay, gumawa, o hindi gumawa ng isang bagay. Ito ay isang juridical necessity, ibig sabihin, may legal na basihan at dapat tuparin. Halimbawa, si Juan ay may obligasyon na bayaran si Pedro ng 10,000 pesos. Dahil sa isang kasunduan, juridical necessity ito, kaya dapat bayaran ni Juan si Pedro.
Essential requisites of obligation. The 4 essential requisites of an obligation are: number 1, the active subject, who is the creditor or obligee. Number 2, passive subject, which is the debtor or obligor. Number 3, object or prestation. So this is the conduct to be performed, which can be giving, doing, and not doing. And lastly, the juridical or legal tie. So this is the bond that connects the parties and gives meaning to their relationship. So these elements are fundamental for an obligation to exist, as they define who has the right, who has the duty, what the duty is, and what binds them together. So to dig more about these 4 essential requisites, here is a more detailed breakdown of each requisite. So, for the active subject, which is the creditor or obligee, this is the person or entity who has the right to demand the fulfillment of the obligation. So, in a loan agreement, the lender is the active subject who is entitled to receive the payment. For the passive subject, or which is the debtor or obligor, this is the person or entity who is bound to perform the obligation or satisfy the demand of the active subject. So, in the loan agreement, the borrower is the passive subject responsible for making the payment. So, here's an example for active and passive subject. So, si Sam, humiram siya ng 500 kay Hart, which is sinabi ni Hart na babayaran niya within a month. So, Si Hart as an active subject or creditor, may karapatan siya na magbigay ng palugit kay Sam kung kailan niya babayaran yung inutang niya. So si Sam, which is the passive subject or debtor, siya yung nanghiram. May obligasyon siya na bayaran yung pinahiram sa kanya ni Hart na pera sa binigay ni Hart na palugit. So, pag sinabi ni Hart na bayaran niya ito within the month, obligasyon ni Sam na bayaran yung inutang niya kay Hart within a month. The third one, the object or prestation on subject matter. This is the conduct or action that the debtor must perform for the creditor's benefits. So, it can take one of three forms: to give, to do, and not to do. So, si to give, ito yung delivery of a thing, such as in a sale or donation. Si to do naman, the performance or a service of a service or work, like a contract for professional services. So, not to do is the refraining from performing a particular act, such as adhering to certain rules or regulations. So, yung object or prestation, parang siya yung laman ng contract ni debtor and ni creditor. So, ito yung mga actions na pwedeng gawin ni debtor para makabayad kay creditor. So, lastly, juridical or legal tie, inefficient cause. So, this is the legal bond or connection that binds the active and passive subject to each other. So, it is the source of the obligation and it gives it a sense of legal enforceability. So, si juridical or legal tie, siya naman yung contract, which is andun yung object or prestation, yung pinakalaman niya. Kumbaga, si legal tie, siya yung contract. Si object or prestation, ayun yung kasulatan na nakalagay dun sa legal tie, which is the contract ni passive and active subject. So, for the next topic, I will be giving the floor to Ms. Rachel Singhgill to tackle more about the concepts and sources of obligation.
Concept and source of obligation. Number 1 is contracts. Contracts are mutual agreement between parties that creating binding obligation. They establish rights and duties that enforceable by law. The obligation arise from the term agreement upon by the parties involved, and they can be either expressed or implemented. For example, when the two parties enter into a sales agreement, the seller has the obligation to deliver the goods, while the buyer has the obligation to pay for them. The second one is the leaks or tort. Delictual obligation arise from the civil wrongs or torts, which is our action that cause harm or loss to another party. This obligation typically required the wrongdoer to compensate the victim for damages incurred. For instances, if a person causes an accident due to negligence, they may be legally obligated to pay for injury or medical expenses for that specific party. The third one is quasi-contracts. Quasi-contracts are not the actual contracts, but may be imposed by the law to prevent unjust enrichment. They arise in the situation where the one party benefits at the expenses of another party, and the law requires the benefiting party to compensate to the other. For example, if a person received emergency medical treatment while unconscious, they may be obligated to pay for those services even though no formal contract was established. Statutory obligation. Statutory obligations are derived from the law or regulation, enacted by the legislative bodies. These obligations are mandatory and must be followed by the individuals. For example, tax law impose obligation on the citizens to file tax return and pay tax owed by the government. Quasi-delicts. Quasi-delicts refers to the obligation arising from an intentional harm caused by a person's action without the needed for negligence or fault. This concept is often applied in cases where a party's action inadvertently cause damage to another party, lead to a legal obligation to compensate from the harm caused. What is an obligator? Obligator is a person or a party who has the duty to do something, usually to pay money or perform an obligation under a contract. Key idea of obligator: the one who owes. Example of an obligator: a tenant who must pay rent to the landlord. For example, sentence: the borrower is the obligator under the loan agreement. In sample word, if you promise to do something, you are the obligator.
The last one is obligee. So what is the obligee means? An obligee is the person or party who has the right to receive something like money, services, or any promised action. The obligee has the several responsibilities. They create the bond, requirements, identifying what kind bond is necessary and how large monetarily it must be. They also hold the bonded party accountable. If someone files a claim or the bond lapses. Ang obligee ay yung person na may right na tumanggap ng something like money, services, or any promise action na under sa contract law. Imagine them as the party na dapat bigyan din sila ng benefit. Siya yung party kung may obligasyon na kailangang gampanan yung isang party. Ito ay madalas gamitin sa mga kontrata. At pwede siyang maging isang creditor or promisee, depending sa situation. Kaya ang obligee ang beneficiary ng isang kasunduan o pangako, meaning sila yung makikinabang. For example, in a principal-surety relationship, an obligee is the creditor who may enforce payment or performance by either principal or surety.